Wow.
This is like a Liam Callanan size crowd. Not quite, but yay. Thank you to everyone for being here. I think a lot of you know my first two books came out during COVID, and my dream has always been to have an event. And Daniel will tell you, I used to come to the UWM reading series events, and I would say, Daniel, one day I'm going to launch a book and I'm going to be at your store. And then COVID came with my first book, and I couldn't come. COVID came with my second book, and I couldn't come. So it's like just extra super thrilling. And I appreciate you guys more than probably any author has ever appreciated someone going to a literary event at a bookstore. So thank you so much. You guys are amazing.
Well, I am just thrilled to be here supporting my friend and fellow writer, Christy. Um, Christy and I are in a writing group together. And the writing group kind of staggered and started a little bit during COVID. So, whereas some years ago, we would all read each other's stuff kind of week by week, page by page. I'd read bits and pieces of the Snowbirds over the 2 years it took you to write it, but I hadn't read the whole thing. And then I got the arc a couple months ago, and I thought I will just hold on to this until like 2 weeks before our event, so it'll be fresh in my mind. So I only read it for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and you are in for such a treat. It is just a joy, and yeah, I'm just thrilled to be here and thrilled to get to ask you some questions about it. And I have over prepared like this is a master's thesis, so get ready.
I'm all in.
Okay, Christy, the first and most hated question. Can you tell us about the book?
That's actually a question I used to kind of forget to ask people when I was the conversation partner, and my mom set me straight. She's like, when I listen, sometimes I don't know what the book is actually about. And I was like, oh, that's true. I need to ask that. So the book is about a couple. Their names are Kim and Grant. They live in Madison, Wisconsin, and they've been together for 30 years for a number of reasons. They've never gotten married, even though they have two kids. And they are at a crossroads in their lives and their relationship. Grant has lost his job at a small liberal arts college that he used to teach at, and when it closes. And Kim has a work sabbatical. And they're not sure. Grant kind of wants to get married now because he needs insurance. And Kim's not sure if that's like such a good idea, like if that's enough of a reason. But she hates the winter. And I don't know anyone else in the audience, like not a winter lover. She wants to go somewhere warm for the winter, and she gets Grant to grudgingly agree to go to Palm Springs with her because her ex-husband owns a condo there. And they go to Palm Springs. They're working on their relationship. Things seem like they're getting better. They're talking through stuff that they've never really addressed before. But then they get in an argument, and Grant has a history when he gets upset of kind of going on a little bit of an emotional walkabout. And so when they get in an argument, the next day he goes on a hike solo, and he doesn't come back. And the huge search is launched to try to find Grant, but she's not really sure if he's actually missing in the mountains of Palm Springs in the San Jacinto Mountains, or if he's left her. So that's what the book is about.
Good summary. um, so I think that for me as a writer, and I know for you too, like plot is the engine. And no matter how beautifully written a book is, and this book is beautifully written, no matter how compelling the characters, you have to, as a writer, your readers need to want to turn the pages, So without a really like just banger of a plot, it doesn't hold together. So this is a banger of a plot. How did you? And I know this is one thing that we did talk about as you were writing it, trying to sort of figure out like not just the structure, but like how to keep your readers engaged and wanting to just keep turning the pages. So how did you figure it out? Like it's like, I mean, do you want to talk about the structure a little bit and just sort of talk about how it builds?
Sure, and plot, because plot, one of the reasons I actually started writing when I felt like I had the confidence to try writing myself was I read Lori Moore, some of her short stories, and I was really inspired because not a lot happens. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I could write a story where nothing happens. This is great. Like just a tone change from major to minor, like as Henry James would say. But then when I had to write a book, plot was something that I struggled with a lot. And with the second home, my debut, something that helped me so much was when I had a writing partner in California. and she's not as good a writing partner as you, Lauren. Don't be jealous. Um, but she worked in television. She actually worked on like The Bachelor and Shark Tank and all these reality TV shows. And you wouldn't think that that would necessarily be the best person, but for me it was, because she looked at my book and she said, you have all these chapters that don't really go anywhere. Like you have a whole chapter where you're just describing Drummer Cove and Wellfleet and how beautiful it is. And like, that's not moving the story forward. And she gave me this radical idea that in every chapter, something needs to happen, which as readers, we know, but when you're writing, sometimes you can lose sight of that. So I think that helped me with all of my books, is to think something needs to happen in each chapter and you need to have a purpose when you're writing, and that the reader needs to feel like every sentence is actually moving the story along. That was really helpful. My problem actually with the Snowbirds, and with Shoulder Season 2, I did the same thing, is I relied too much on plot. I had too much plot. And I never thought that would be a problem. My editor would always be like, Christy, let's make this less plot. You don't need all these complications, because the reader also needs to know what to focus on. So I think with the Snowbirds, I thought that I needed some really big hook. And my editor was like, well, you have a guy who goes missing. Like, that's a hook. And I was like, oh, I guess that is something that happens. So it made the whole story kind of easier once it seems so obvious. A lot of times when you're writing, the most obvious thing is not obvious, which is why you need other readers.
But I guess maybe my question is also kind of about structure, because you like it sort of moves back and forth in time. And that to me was like, that's what I didn't know or didn't realize, because, when I read bits and pieces as you were working on it, like it's brilliant because, there are flashbacks, and then there's the flashbacks that sort of like build their relationship and sort of, sort of the flashbacks are like the background of Kim and Grant's relationship, and then the present tense is this like really kind of nail biting search. So like I think that's part of what I meant when I was asking about that.
Oh yeah,
that just like pulled me in.
Well, and that structure was really difficult. I studied with Rick Moody. Did you guys ever read The Ice Storm or see that movie? It's one of my favorites. Anyway, this is about 15 years ago, and he was saying that backstory's dead. How some writers are really like make these big proclamations. And I was like, oh, backstory is not cool. You can't tell about what happened in the past if the story only can move forward. And it kind of messed up my writing in the same way that someone taking a golf lesson can mess up a golf game. It made it worse, but then it also made it better, because it made me think a lot about how time should work and how you should incorporate backstory so you're not boring the reader, because you want to keep them engaged in what's moving forward. But the story is about a couple over 30 years, and you can't really write a story like that without explaining what their story is. So I think that was probably the hardest part of writing this book, and what made it extra challenging was figuring out, well, how do I lace that in? How do I make it so you don't have backstory where it's like one of those bad soap opera dream sequences, and my editor was really helpful with that she was like, well, there are these times when Grant isn't that reliable, or where Kim has screwed up, because, every relationship, it usually takes two to tango. Right. And so she kind of suggested the structure that we ended up with. And then it was kind of there already, but I think she helped figure out the pacing of it. But it's risky. And, a lot of you have been to book clubs that I've visited. And, when you talk to people in book clubs, sometimes they'll complain about other books they read. And I'll hear it in my head. And when I'm writing, I'm like, oh gosh, like people don't like multiple timelines. People don't like this. They don't like that. So I was like, are they going to like it if it goes back in time? I don't know.
So that was the hardest thing about writing the book, which was question number 42 on my list. So what was that? What was the easiest thing?
Easiest?
Yeah. Or like, what did you find the most, like, what did you love best about writing?
I went back and forth between telling this story in third person and first person. So third person is when you write like he, she, they. And then when it's first person, it's from the narrator's perspective. And I couldn't figure out what to land on for a while. The thing I like about third person is that the language can be kind of elevated, because you can write in a way that might be a little nicer than the way your narrator sees the world. But with first person, you can use more humor. And so I think going back and forth and finding the voice of Kim, my main character, once I got that, and then I could actually just use a little more humor in the book, which I didn't have I had some like humorous lines, and especially in shoulder season. The second home had some lines that I thought were kind of funny, but maybe no one else noticed them. But this one I had a lot of fun. Like I think the easier part was just kind of letting a little bit of humor creep into the book. So that was fun.
Remember when her name was, it wasn't Kim, it was
like
Tia or something like that? Trish or something like that?
Yeah, you were.
Who gave you the name Kim? It was me.
Lauren has done this with every book I've written. Like we'll go back whenever I'm stuck. You're like, change her name to Kitty.
Change your name, change your life.
But remember that the book I wrote, like I wrote a book for my PhD and it was really bad. And wait, I think Liam's here. Cover your ears. But it was a book where I learned a lot about writing a novel. But anyway, I remember I'd struggled with that, and you were like, her name's Kitty. Just change it. And it does. It changes your whole perception of the character when you give them a different name.
Okay. So this book is about a middle-aged couple, and really it sort of hangs on Kim, the middle-aged woman. And I think that, you and I've talked about this. I think middle-aged women are kind of having a moment. Might just be, I hope they are. But the book Sandwich by Catherine Newman, and All Fours by Miranda July, and the movie Baby Girl. And I, in our conversation, I know that you and I sort of have mixed feelings about sometimes how middle-aged women are presented. I think it's great that that this time of life is being not just talked about, but kind of celebrated. How did the idea of writing about a middle-aged woman come to you? And just what do you think about the whole? If we're right, and there is sort of this movement, and middle-aged women are being a little bit elevated in sort of popular culture and literary culture, why do you think that is?
Well, I'll just start out. In 1 week, I kind of deserve an award for this. I read Sandwich and All Fours, and I watched Baby Girl. So that's quite a middle-aged trifecta. And one thing, and there's a lot to appreciate in every one of those pieces of art. But one thing that I noticed is it seems like a lot of, not so much in Sandwich, but I feel like middle-age, there's like Hollywood in particular has this idea that as long as women can just like really let go of their sexuality and like become like super hypersexual or fully realize that way, they'll be happy. But I think there's just so much else about middle age that's so interesting. And there's a line, I can't remember which writer was talking about it. It kind of creeps into my book about how women can have many renaissances in their lives. And I wanted to write about someone who's at a point where you kind of do pause when your kids leave the house and you're getting a little older. You kind of see what's ahead. Your time is a little shorter in front of you than behind you. And you kind of can think, well, I could become like even more what I am. Like I could kind of calcify and be this, or I can become really uncomfortable and change. But you can also get really comfortable in middle age. So I just feel like I wanted to write about somebody who was in that situation where they could kind of navigate those two different options. And going to a place like Palm Springs, there's this question like, can a place change you? And Palm Springs is really different culturally and socially. And I just wanted to throw my Midwestern, very normal character, I wanted Kim to be super normal, into this mix and see how she responds to it and see if that place really does change her. And I think being middle-aged is interesting too, and because she's not, people think of Snowbirds as being retirees, being older, and she's not quite there yet, but she's thinking about it. And it's a lot like when John and I, my husband John, we bought a place in Palm Springs during COVID and started spending a lot of time there. And it was just a really interesting place to go to see if there's like a bridge to retirement, try it out and think about what's next.
I plan on calcifying. Just for the record.
Nothing wrong with that.
Thank you. But okay, that's a good segue to the setting in a lot of your books is kind of a character, and very much so in this book. And so that's like a sort of two-pronged question for me. Palm Springs is so, I've never been, but I kind of feel like I have, because you're so specific, and some of the, like, where does it say in the book or in the St. Martin's guide that Palm Springs is like a zany place? I was like, zany, but it feels kind of zany. Like, it feels like it's so interesting. And so it feels like, and Kim really is a fish out of water there. Like how, I don't know, just talk about Palm Springs and sort of what that, you know, how that plays such an important role in this book. I don't think this would be the same book if they had gone to Florida or out, somewhere else out west. I mean, it feels very specific to Palm Springs, and that was really interesting to me.
Palm Springs, first of all, is small. I was just in Miami Beach and Tampa, and those are snowbird places, but they feel really big, and I actually kept thinking about a sequel to the Snowbirds when I was there. But Palm Springs has a very specific culture. A lot of it came from all the celebrities who visited they have this thing called the 2-hour rule, where the celebrities in the star system, when they were signed with one of the studios, they were only allowed to go within 2 hours of Los Angeles. So in case they needed to be on the set, they would get called back. So back in the 50s and 60s, all the stars would go to Palm Springs and hang out there and have a lot of freedom. So I think it kind of created this idea of Palm Springs as this really kind of wealthy enclave, but also very carefree and fun. And then also a lot of people retire there. So there's a lot of leisure time. And a lot of the people are wealthy. Like Grant in my book spends a lot of time counting the number of private jets that land behind the Walmart at the airport. So you're in a place where money doesn't get made, but money gets spent. And it's much different than a place like Milwaukee, which has a huge manufacturing base, right? Like this is a blue collar town where people work, and that has a totally different ethos that way, I think. It's also a lot like Provincetown in Cape Cod. If you've been there, it's a gay mecca, and it has a really wonderful culture. And it's, we meet so many people in Palm Springs who, like in the mornings, I go to this workout class, and there's a scene set there in the book, but it's in this park called Ruth Hardy Park. And you just show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and you bring hand weights. And the guy who teaches it is like Richard Simmons. And people wear tutus and they get all dressed up and they have capes. And it's so, like you can do things in Palm Springs, like wear star sunglasses, and nobody even thinks it's weird. So it's just like a much more open town that way. You feel like you're not at all self-conscious when you're in that environment.
Which makes Kim and Grant, which brings their crisis kind of to like laser focuses their crisis, because they're sort of uncomfortable people in a place where they don't where that it kind of shines a light on them as like sort of uptight Midwesterners.
Right. Well, and Grant is, he's really uncomfortable with the idea of snowbirding, because he's like, I don't play tennis. I burn easy. I don't play pickleball. I don't do anything. Like, what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit around. He's a professor. He's not a kind of person who would sit around and read by a pool. So I think that it was fun to have him discover how he can keep himself occupied and entertained. That's a big part of snowbirding. Like anytime you go somewhere, you spend the first couple weeks just trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do to keep ourselves busy and to stay entertained, especially if you're not used to a life where you're not going to the office every day.
Okay, so the second prong of that setting question is that you are really good at writing about weather, and it's been a theme in most in I think all of your other books, and like weather almost becomes its own character, and it's much bigger than just a sort of series of external conditions. It kind of like illuminates the differences between Kim and Grant, and I don't know, can you talk, I mean, so this is a different question from like Palm Springs, even though so much of Palm Springs is the difference in weather between Madison and California. But I don't know, I mean, you have such an interesting and like funny take on all of this. Can you talk about like weather and how it affects like what it is in your writing?
Yeah, well, I remember when I was working on the second home, one day I realized I was using the word cold a lot to document when you can search to see how many times you use the word. And I used the word cold like 1 billion times. I had to go through and kind of clean it up a little bit. I'm always acutely aware of my temperature and where I am. I just want to be warm all the time. I had this really minor surgery once, and when I was waking up, I came to and they had heated blankets and heat warmers. They were like, we could not get you to warm up. And that's why I don't like to ski. Once I'm cold, I can't get warm. And I think that's actually something that I was thinking a lot about with this book, is because when you don't like the cold, but you're with someone who does, I think when you have kids and you're living a different kind of life and you have a lot of social obligations to where you are, it's weather can be a shallow concern. Why would you go somewhere just because of the weather when you have all these other things? But when you are middle-aged and your kids are gone and you have more freedom, maybe weather actually is not shallow. And what happens if you're in a relationship where one person really loves the cold, like Grant does, and the other person really doesn't? So I thought that was kind of interesting to think about in the book and to write about and see how they respond to the weather.
Because it says so much more about who they are. It's not just like, oh, I'm cold. I don't like this. You do. It just says so much more about like your relationship with the whole world.
That's so true because Grant likes to read all the time. And I think there is something about living in the Midwest where, like, we went to San Diego to one of my husband's friends' houses once. And I looked around and I was like, there's like 2 books here in this whole house, and I'm glad he's not in the audience. But then I did kind of think, well, in the Midwest, maybe there is something more like there, we have some sort of like moral fiber, we're tough. We get through really hard times in the weather. And and Grant even jokes about it, like about how thinking that you have moral superiority because you live in a cold climate and you read more books. And I actually kind of do think that, like I can go to Palm Springs a lot, but I pay my dues.
Okay, so the overarching theme in this book is lost love. Should I maybe just ask one more question? And
Yeah.
then I feel like there are so many people here and they probably all have questions. So maybe this will be my last one for now. So the overarching theme is lost love, and it's literally reflected in the many times Grant leaves and comes back, and the way, and I feel like it's sort of a reflection of the way, or a demonstration of the way people lose each other and come back together throughout the course of a long relationship. So to me, it felt both very realistic in the context of the book and almost fable-like, although this is not a fable, but just like the sort of like metaphor of like turning away and coming home and kind of turning away from each other and coming back together. So what about that theme was interesting to you? And like, why does it play such a large role in this book?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I think when you've been in a long relationship, over the course of your relationship, there's always like ebbs and flows. It was funny. I was in Miami last week and I was talking to this couple and they were talking about how they never had children because they're always touching each other. They were like super enmeshed, and super tight and close. And they didn't want to grow apart because they saw their friends, like as soon as like babies were introduced into the picture, that it adds a lot of tension and stress in a relationship. And he was like, I never wanted to lose my wife's love, because of the children. But it's true. Like when you have kids, it changes it deepens it too. You get to see your partner under different circumstances and appreciate them. And then life, you can get really busy, with careers, like, and kind of lose each other and come back together. And you don't necessarily need to be like Grant and physically leave to feel like sometimes there are times in a relationship when the other person's not really there. I say this, really, I'm talking about other people's relationships because my husband is rock solid, always there. Yeah, he actually is. Yeah. I mean, he actually is here and he is actually rock solid. He's great. I was really worried people would think that he's Grant. And I'm like, no, it's like.
John and I were talking about this before. So Grant is short?
Yeah. Grant's
okay. Well,
short.
John is like 9 feet tall. So that's.
Yeah. You'll know who John is when everyone stands. Yeah. But I think that fear of, I actually think it's so interesting when you look at other couples to see how they navigate closeness in their relationship. There's some couples that seem like they're almost like too involved in each other's lives. And then there are couples where they just go off and they just do their own things all the time. And every couple's kind of somewhere on that spectrum. And for the purpose of the book, I had my couple be really, like, they spent so much time apart that when life threw them together and they knew they're heading into retirement and they would spend a lot more time together, how could they do that? And I actually think maybe some of that, like just from my own personal life, I haven't really thought about that till now, but my husband is much older than I am. And he talks about, but he's not that much older. But he talks about retiring sometimes. And I think before COVID, it really terrified me, but then we spent a lot of time together during COVID and it really changed our relationship for the better. Like he knows how to run the dishwasher really well. And so.
Wait, I do have one more question before we go to the audience, if that's okay. Can Kim goes kind of full on California towards the end of the book, which I was really surprised by. She sort of embraces some new age philosophies and ideas in a way that felt very genuine. And it felt like you, the writer, and the narrator were taking these ideas seriously as much as Kim was, which just surprised me knowing you, and also just felt like a really interesting kind of turn in the book. Because some of those new agey sort of philosophies kind of lend themselves to mockery, but they're really not mock. You don't do that. Like that would have been a cheap shot, I think, and you didn't do it. So without spoiling anything, because it kind of is something that occurs later in the book, can you talk about that and sort of how some of those spiritual and metaphysical ideas came to feel meaningful to you?
Yeah, when you're in Palm Springs, like just a lot of people are into more. I mean, I think New Age isn't really a phrase we use as much now. Like I don't even know what phrase you'd use for a lot of the kind of more spiritual leanings now. But when you're in Palm Springs, like they have sound baths all the time, and people go, and there's just a lot of talk about about connecting in a different way that's much different than the way Kim and Grant do. And I think when you're around people like I am a lot, they're so sincere in their thinking and their beliefs. And I met actually a healer when I was there, a spiritual healer. She was really helpful for so much of the book. And it was interesting. Well, this is such a weird story, but I was really skeptical. I was like, oh, whatever, this will be good research for the book. And so she had me like lie down, and she would walk around and like feel different parts of me. And she was by my right foot. And in my head, I just was like in boulders. I was in the bottom of a bunch of boulders. And that's what I saw in my head. And at the end of the thing, I was like, well, I don't really get that much out of this. And I was like, did anything happen for you? And she said, I was by your right foot, and I just saw you surrounded by rocks. And I was like, whoa, and it's, so I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes there really is something to that. And it also goes along with like being middle-aged too, like of like transcending our own belief systems and appreciating the sincerity with which other people do that. So before we ask questions, can I just do one thing?
No.
I just want to acknowledge my mom, Pat Geiger. She's, do you understand? Oh, we should get a picture of her. Yay. Wait, look at it. And the reason I wanted to do that is, first of all, she's been incredibly supportive. Kim's mother is not very nice in the book, but my mom is really nice. And she made 2 sweaters for me. And so this is a sweater that my mom made to match the cover. So isn't that amazing? And not only did she make this one, but she knit a second sweater with the extra yarn that has stripes, because this one is for when I'm in Palm Springs, but I wore it tonight because this one she said she likes the best. And then the striped one is for when it's colder, but it's they're really beautiful. If you go on my Instagram, it's like Christina Clancy author. You'll see I have a little video, and you can see my dog too, because she's there. But anyway, thanks, Mom, for the beautiful sweaters.
Yeah. We take it to the audience. You want to just call on people?
Oh, sure. Does anyone have any questions? Well, this is embarrassing. Yeah.
Ask your inspiration for your characters. Did you have to do much research, or was it based more on personal experience and training?
Yeah, thanks. It's interesting how characters come to you. Sometimes you feel like you need to spend a lot of time getting to know them. And they remember that old Doonesbury comic where the character was like an asterisk? Was it George Bush? Whenever he appeared, it was like an asterisk. But sometimes they feel like an asterisk, like they're not really there. They're just kind of an idea of a character, and you have to spend a lot of time getting to know them. And other times your characters just start speaking. There's a character named Melody Underwood in the book. And the minute I started writing Melody, she just I could hear her sing song language. I knew exactly what she was going to say. You just feel like a vessel for the characters. But one thing that I do like to do is really truly make up a character. I don't, sometimes they're inspired by broad outlines of somebody I know, but I don't write autofiction, which is really trendy right now, where people write about their own life, but they just kind of have this saran wrap of fiction over it, And I like to just truly make up characters. So Grant and Kim feel like they're really different to me. So, but they, it's really, I love working on the characters, and I feel like everyone writes differently. And for me, I'm a character driven writer. I let the characters tell me the story instead of feeling like I'm having characters get me through the plot and dragging them through the plot. Yeah. Only if you want to. This is this is one of those events. Everyone's happy. Yeah.
But in the end, so much that happens that she kind of realizes. Does anything like that happen in this book? What does the character development look like, and what was your favorite part about that?
It's so funny that you asked me that question, because shoulder season kind of messed me up, because there's something that surprises you at the end of shoulder season that I loved it when I was writing it. It was so surprising to me too. I didn't know that was going to happen. And I was like, whoa. And even my editor, when she read it, she was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that, and I felt like I had to do something like that with this book. But this is just a different book, so I felt like I kept waiting for that, and thinking I had to have a big twist. But it didn't end up being a book where that was the actual, like, the twist was that important. Instead it was kind of more straightforward. Like, the characters are trying to figure out a lot of these things and how do they do it. So I'm not going to say there's no twist, because I don't want you guys to read it and be really bored and be like, well, there's no twist at the end, so why bother? But thanks for asking that question, because I did give that so much thought. Thanks. Yeah, Tanya.
Like from start to finish, or does it veer off? Do you come back to it? Like when I started painting, I know who I'm going to paint, but it just takes on a life of its own, and I never know how it's going to finish. So do you know how, or does it just?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but first I'm going to plug your art. Tanya Cameron is amazing. She's an incredible artist, and her Instagram is so great. And you should definitely check out her paintings of, like, mostly rock and roll musicians. They're so colorful and bright. So thank you. I don't know, really. I wish I did, because it would make everything so much easier, but it would also make it boring for me. And the fun part for me of writing is when something happens that I'm not expecting, or a character develops in a certain way. And so I think that's why, when I was teaching at Beloit College, one of the things I would always stress to my students is the importance of revision, because if they wrote a first draft and they thought it was bad, they thought they just sucked as writers. But then you realize, no, that's the first draft is just you trying to tell the story to yourself, and then you start telling it to your readers in subsequent drafts. And so I can just, like, it frees me in my first draft to think, this doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to know what's going. I can give myself little writing exercises and try things, and then figure out what works and what doesn't. And then the story will start coming together as I keep revising and moving forward. But I really, like, everyone has their own process, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. For me, the excruciating but also more fun way is to just kind of pants it, as they call it. Like, you write by the seat of your pants, or you're a planner, and I'm a pantser. Pantser? Really? I know. Yeah.
How does one go about finding a writer?
Well, it's really one of those things that took me a long time to find a writers group. It's hard to find people where their feedback you trust, and where everyone in the group you know that you're comfortable sharing your work with them. There's nothing more defeating than when you write something and you're excited about it, and you share it with someone and they shut it down, and they can shut down an entire book. So you have to be super careful. And I know you're really careful about not sending pages too soon. Like, you want to wait until you feel like you're really comfortable getting them out there. But I think one of the best ways to find a writers group is to be as active in the writing community as you can. Like, go to workshops, and find yourself in situations where people will read your work. It's really so generous of people to read work that's early. It's such a gift to find people who will do that. Anyone who lays, I mean, that's why I'm so appreciative of people like reading my book. I never forget that's an honor. So I would go to as many writing workshops as you can. There's also a podcast that I really like. It's called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. Bianca Murray she's been to Boswell a bunch of times, and she's going to be here this summer. In fact, I should hit up Daniel for an event when she's here. But she's wonderful, and they will often have ways that writers who listen to the podcast can meet other writers to get feedback and form writers groups. So that's one way that I know of. I know there are other ways. In Milwaukee, do you know any other?
I was just going to jump in and say, when I first moved here, like 20 years ago, I connected with Redbird, which I think is now Red Oak. I don't know. I think they've switched, or another, there might be two, but anyway, just Red Oak. So just call them. I just called them, and there was a writing group that was already sort of happening, and I started going to that. And then a couple of us, it was too big, so a couple of us kind of just split off and started our own writing group. So that's how it worked for me. But that's a good writing community.
Yeah, I've started out with a Redbird too. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Oh, a fun one. Good. Okay, well, I have to tell you something. And some people in this room know this, Margie. I'm a spin instructor. I used to be. So building playlists was like my hobby for about 20 years. So I have playlists for all of my books, and I have a playlist for the Snowbirds, but I haven't like finalized it yet. Because it's kind of both hyper and then mellow, and I'm trying to figure out whether it should be like one that's a hyper one for working out and one for, when you're feeling miserable. So I'm trying to work it out. But I definitely, as I listen to music, I'm like, oh, this is such a Snowbird song. But the first song on my playlist, if you want to look it up, the characters end up in this condo community that's called the La Desert. And it's affiliated with a hotel. I hope they don't mind, because it actually exists in Palm Springs, called Le Cactus. And Le Cactus is from this Jacques Dutronc song. I think it's from the 50s. And the lyrics are, all the world's a cactus, it's impossible to sit down. So but anyway, that's the first one. And that definitely is on the playlist. Thank you. I love that. Oh, great. Okay, Margie.
This book, you spent a lot of time on the East Coast. Okay, and then you really get entrenched in that area.
Mhm.
Into Palm Springs. So where are you going next?
Where are we going, Margie? Because you've been to Palm Springs. Yeah, the question is, where am I going next with the book? I've actually been thinking about that a lot. And one place I might want to write about is Denver, because that's where I'm from originally. So it'd be kind of interesting to write Denver. The only problem is, when I grew up in Denver, I mean, we moved when I was pretty young. But it's like an oil bus town. It's not at all like what it is now, with all these, young people and Cherry Creek Mall and crowds and stadiums. So, but I do think maybe Denver, I've been playing with that idea, but I'm not quite sure. I also think maybe like going somewhere in Europe would be really fun, or Uruguay, or I don't know. I got to plan some vacations, and that's a write-off. Thank you. And Margie's been to Palm Springs, so she's seen our place there and the Araby neighborhood, which is what I write about. Yeah, Jane.
Curious, as you now say your third book, what's your writing process been like? Like, I know you've been years, but this book was amazing to me.
It's amazing to me. I wish I could tell you that it got easier. I was kind of arrogant, honestly, after I finished my first book and sold it, and I had a 2-book contract, and I was like, no problem, I've already done this. And then I was like, oh crap. It's like you have to teach yourself the whole process all over again. But I think knowing that you can get from the beginning to end is helpful. I also think one thing that stunned me with my first book was how much work it was for a book to truly be done. And I think it's kind of intimidating to start a new project now, knowing that, because you really have to love your project, because it's so much of your head is in that. So so my process is I don't know. I think I'm one of those people, I don't write regularly every day, which I know I should. Everyone says I do. But even if I'm not writing every day, I try to read what I'm working on to keep my head in it. And then I also, like, for as far as writing process goes, a process thing is I can only write a little bit when I'm generating new content. I don't know if you feel this way, but it's kind of exhausting to like create something new. But then when I'm editing, I love to edit, actually. And I like, for me, that's the total fun part, is you get it on the page and then you can go through and edit. And I can do that like 8 hours, 12 hours a day. So it just depends which part of the process I'm in. But thanks, Jane. Jane and I went to high school together. Any other? Yeah, they do.
What
They're kind of more side characters, because they're kind of off scene most of the book, because Kim and Grant are in that stage of life, and they're actually really sad that their kids can't be there. Like, they can't spend Thanksgiving together, for example. One of their kids is even in Europe. So but they kind of are laced in through like phone calls or texts, or they have like a text chain. Yeah, in the flashbacks, you definitely get to know the kids. So it was fun to write them. There's a character, actually, one of the kids. This is kind of moving, but in our writing group, we had one of our members of our writing group, John Olson, was working on this beautiful manuscript, and he had a character named Dort, and it was a historical fiction novel. And all of us said, we're going to have a character in our books named Dort. And so one of the daughters' names is Dort, and my editor sent me an email when she read some early pages, and she's like, I don't understand why you have a character named Dort. Every time I see it, I get hung up on it. And you either need to explain it or change her name.
And I want to say that John passed away.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
And in sort of like a tribute to him, we all decided.
Yes.
His manuscript was based on his family. So it was so Dort wasn't just a weird name that he came up with. I think it was his grandmother, Dorothy, or something.
Right. Yeah. It was a great name, and it was a great tribute to him. So anyway, I figured out a way to explain Dort. So I'm really proud that I kept Dort in the book, because I was not going to publish this book without paying homage to our friend John. So thank you for that question. Oh, absolutely. I'll post him on Instagram. Yeah. Thank you. Great. Yeah. I don't. I wish I did. Sometimes when I do writing exercises, I will. They say that it's good for your brain to do that, but I generally use a laptop. I just like being able to edit, and it's funny. Like, even like writing a check these days feels like kind of hard, isn't it? But
can we maybe do one or two more questions?
Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, hi. Yeah, no, it's funny you asked that, because I've been trying to keep a journal more. And I realized the problem with my journal keeping was that I would feel obligated to write in my journal at night, but I'm tired at night. And that's when I like to read. So on New Year's, my New Year's resolution was to journal first thing in the morning. So I don't go to my phone. I grab my journal and I sit down, and I'll just write down some observations. And it's amazing how much that's changed my journaling. But I also keep on my iPhone, I'll keep notes, but I hardly ever look at them. I always kind of think if there's something that's important enough or interesting enough, it'll stay with me. So yeah, thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you.
I have a fun question for you. Who are some of your favorite authors?
Lauren Fox. I'm not kidding when I say that. Lauren is an incredibly gifted writer. And in our writing group, we always love getting Lauren's pages. I mean, she just is such an amazing craft. Every 2 years when she sends us 3 paragraphs, we savor them. But her book Sent for Me that just was out last year, 2 years ago. No way. Isn't COVID one big blur? Like, I don't remember anything. Anyway, she was on the Today Show with Reads with Jenna. So definitely check out Lauren's books. Truly. I love a book that Daniel turned me on to. It's one of my favorite books. It's called All My Puny Sorrows, and it's by a writer named Miriam Teves. I always thought it was Toes because it's spelled Toews, but you say it Teves. She's famous in Canada, and Daniel just put the book in my hand. Isn't that like the great thing about an independent bookstore? Like, thank you. Yeah. And Chris Lee is always giving me great recommendations. We both loved Rufie Thorpe's Margot's Got Money Trouble. That was like a huge book. And what was the book that Chris and what was the other book that we were both crazy for that I read that you, pardon me? Rabbit Hutch. I know I read that because you recommended it. There's one, never mind. But Chris and Daniel always give me really good recommendations for books that I might not have heard about otherwise, which I always love. And I also love Marilyn Robinson's book, Housekeeping. Like if you love gorgeous sentences and just like a dreamlike book. I actually think Housekeeping informed The Second Home, which kind of surprised me when I reread it. I was like, oh, I think this sort of crept into my consciousness. Yeah. When did I read Housekeeping? I read it in college because I think it was kind of one of those books with Marilyn Robinson when she published it. I don't think it was like a big book and then oh.
Yeah, it's based upon a Wordsworth poem.
No way, really?
Yeah. The Wordsworth poem is called The Ruined Cottage.
The Ruined Cottage?
Turns everything in the poem upside down.
That is wow. I need to do it.
Takes off, in the poem,
Uh-huh.
and her whole life falls apart. And this thing, in Housekeeping, she's alone, but she flourished. It's really hilarious what she does.
Oh, I love that. I have a contact thing if you go to my website, which is like Christy Clancy Writes or something. But there's a contact form. If you ever feel like you want to send me that paper, I'd love to read it. That sounds great. Oh. Uh-huh.
I think they just kind of blew it off. Either she didn't want people to know that it was based on Wordsworth.
Wow.
She didn't realize it.
We need to have a read along with Marilyn Robinson. That's great. Thank you for telling me that. That's amazing. Oh, great. I have one quick question before we go. Would you guys mind if I took a picture of all of you? If you have my book like holding it, that would just be so cool. Is that okay? This is truly the event of my dreams and you're all part of it. So thank you. I feel like I manifested every one of you. Thank you.